Thank you, Rosa. Again, my name is Lynn Jennings, and I am the Section Chief of EPA's Massachusetts Superfund section. I'd like to welcome you all to this public hearing on the Olin Chemical Superfund site in Wilmington, Mass. The purpose of tonight's event is to present a brief recap of EPA's proposed cleanup plan for the site and to provide the public an opportunity to make formal oral comments on EPA's proposed plan. Slide 2, please. The agenda for tonight's event will be as follows. First, I will provide some basic instructions for participation. Next, I will turn the meeting over to EPA Project Manager Josh Fontaine, who will recap the range of alternatives considered for the cleanup and EPA's preferred alternative. Following Josh's presentation, I will explain how you can submit comments on our plan, and after the presentation, we will begin the formal hearing. Slide 3. Now I would like to review some basic instructions for participating. Many of you have joined this event using your computer and a link to Adobe Connect found on our website. This allows you to view and listen to the presentation and hearing through your computer. However, please note that your microphone in Adobe Connect will be muted by us to eliminate background noises. Some of you may be watching this event through Wilmington's Community Television, WCTV. For the formal hearing, our website contains instructions for how to pre-register to participate. Those that pre-registered should have received instructions with a telephone number and conference code. If you did not pre-register but want to make a comment tonight, you may dial the number and enter the conference code provided on this slide to get in the queue for providing a comment. We will keep the number posted in the corner of the screen. If you are dialing in, please mute the audio on your computer to eliminate background noise. Once we get to the formal hearing, I will provide additional instructions on how to participate. Everyone watching via Adobe Connect, cable TV, and listening via the phone lines will be able to hear all remarks. Now I will turn the meeting over to EPA Project Manager Josh Fontaine.
Slide 4. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Josh Fontaine, and I am one of the project managers for the Olin site together with Melanie Morash. To recap, EPA evaluated a variety of cleanup options for the site, grouping them as shown on this slide, to address the different media impacted. First, a range of alternatives were established to address dense aqueous phase liquid, or DAPL, and groundwater hot spots, with the goal of an interim action to remove these ongoing sources. It is an interim action, cleanup action, because we don't know the full extent of impacts to groundwater, and further studies are ongoing under a data gaps work plan. A final action for groundwater will be proposed at a later date. Next, a separate set of alternatives were developed for a final action to address light non-aqueous phase liquid, or LNAPL, and the ongoing discharge of contaminated groundwater into surface water. Finally, a set of alternatives were developed for a final action to address the soil and sediment contamination. Slide 5. EPA considered a range of alternatives for the interim cleanup of DAPL and groundwater, including no action. Each alternative is increasingly more aggressive in removing and treating various concentrations of N-nitrosodimethylamine, or NDMA. EPA's preferred alternative is Alternative 3, which consists of removing DAPL by installing approximately 20 extraction wells, installing 6 additional extraction wells for removing groundwater hotspots with concentrations of NDMA greater than 5,000 nanograms per liter, and constructing a new on-site treatment system. Slide 6. This slide shows a conceptual layout of EPA's preferred alternative, with DAPL extraction wells shown in green and hotspot groundwater extraction wells shown in blue. An estimated 2 to 3 years will be needed for design and construction, and the operational time for this interim action is estimated to be 8 years. The cost of this interim remedy is $35.5 million, which is EPA's first step in the cleanup of the aquifer. EPA prefers this alternative for the following reasons. 1, uncontrolled DAPL sources which are a major source of contamination to downgradient water and are highly toxic, will be removed and treated. Groundwater hot spots will be removed and treated, thereby limiting the further spread of highly contaminated groundwater, which acts as a source of contamination to the aquifer. 3. The alternative provides the best balance between the amount of contaminant mass removed, approximately 7,000 grams of NDMA, for the volume of groundwater that must be extracted to achieve this reduction, approximately 68.4 million gallons. By contrast, Alternative 2 would remove approximately 40% less NDMA mass, and Alternative 4 would require the extraction of 40 million additional gallons of groundwater to achieve only a modest 4% increase in the mass of NDMA removed. And 4, of the 3 action alternatives considered, this option has moderate costs, $35.5 million as compared to $22.5 million for Alternative 2 and $40.5 million for Alternative 4. Under this alternative, an estimated 68 million gallons of DAPL in highly contaminated groundwater will be pumped out of the aquifer and treated in a new treatment system. The exact location of the new treatment system will be determined during the design phase. DAPL will be treated by lime precipitation to remove metals, with subsequent evaporation, dewatering, and off-site disposal of the liquid and sludge materials in a permitted facility. Additional treatment will be provided for the highly contaminated groundwater via an influent equalization tank, a hypochlorite flash mixer for oxidation and removal of metals, breakpoint chlorination to treat ammonia, removal of particulates and filtration to dewater solids, granular activated carbon to remove volatile compounds, UV photo oxidation to break down NDMA, and finally discharge of the treated water to surface water. The exact location of the discharge outfall of treated water will be determined during the design phase. Slide 7. Another component of EPA's preferred alternative for groundwater is ongoing studies within the groundwater study area, which is shown on this slide, outlined in red, and which may be expanded or decreased in the future based on new information. Investigations would continue to close remaining data gaps in groundwater, and the results of these efforts would be used to evaluate long-term groundwater cleanup options, leading to the selection of a final groundwater cleanup for the Olin site. Until final cleanup goals for groundwater are selected and achieved, a set of land use restrictions, also called institutional controls, would be implemented within the Olin study area that would prohibit the unauthorized use of groundwater. In this area, EPA, in consultation with Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, would be further evaluating existing wells. Examples of institutional controls include notice of activity and use limitations, count ordinances, advisories, building permit requirements, or other administrative controls. The institutional controls will be developed to accomplish the following. 1, prohibit future residential use at the Olin property. 2, prohibit the use of groundwater in the study area for drinking, irrigation, or industrial purposes unless it can be demonstrated to EPA that such use will not pose unacceptable risks, cause further migration of groundwater contaminant plume, or interfere with EPA's chosen cleanup remedy. 3, prevent disturbance of the infrastructure components of the remedy. 4, prevent contact with soil beneath cover systems. And 5, prevent unacceptable vapor intrusion related exposures to trimethylpentenes or TMPs. Slide 8. EPA considered a range of alternatives for the final cleanup of LNAPL and surface water, including no action. The second and third alternatives consist of different strategies based on multi-phase extraction, or MPE, and groundwater extraction and treatment, while the fourth alternative consists of excavation to address the LNAPL and permeable reactive barriers to treat contaminated groundwater. EPA's preferred alternative is Alternative 3, which consists of the demolition of Plant B, installing 5 MPE wells to capture LMAPL, a targeted approach for groundwater extraction to prevent discharges to surface water, and installation of a new treatment system to treat groundwater. Slide 9. This slide shows the conceptual layout for EPA's preferred alternative, in which Plant B, located in the northeastern portion of the Olin property, would operate until the groundwater treated there could be rerouted to a new groundwater treatment system. This new system will be the same system that will treat the extracted DAPL and hotspot groundwater. Once Plant B is demolished, an estimated 5 MPE wells would be installed within the LMAPL footprint to remediate LMAPL, the smear zone, and dissolved phase site contaminants that would otherwise impact East Ditch Stream. A treatment system consisting of an oil water separator and granular activated carbon would treat the extracted water and soil vapor, and the recovered LMAPL would be disposed off site at a permitted facility. Under this alternative, extraction wells would be installed along off-property West Ditch streams at locations upgradient of the weir in the upper portion of the South Ditch Stream, in midway along South Ditch Stream between the weir and the confluence with East Ditch Stream to intercept and treat the overburdened groundwater contaminant plume that impacts these streams. An estimated 2 to 3 years will be needed for design and construction, and a 30-year time frame was used for a cost estimation for operation, maintenance, and monitoring. EPA estimates the cost of this alternative will be $6.6 million. EPA prefers this alternative for the following reasons. 1, it achieves substantial risk reduction by treating LMAPL via multi-phase extraction, which uses standard and readily available equipment. 2, the demolition of Plant B provides accessibility to previously inaccessible entire footprint of the LMAPL contaminated zone for treatment. 3, the alternative uses groundwater extraction and treatment, which is a proven, effective technology that allows for optimization, permanently removes site contaminants from groundwater, and prevents contaminated groundwater from impacting the streams. 4, of the 3 action alternatives considered, this alternative provides for the greatest reduction of contaminant mobility and volume through treatment, and is the most reliable and easiest to implement. And 5, of the 3 action alternatives considered, this option is more effective in the short term, more extensively reduces the contamination through treatment, and has the lowest costs. Slide 10. EPA considered a range of alternatives for the final cleanup of soil and sediments to prevent unacceptable human and ecological exposures, including no action. Each alternative is increasingly more reliant on excavation to address the contamination, with active treatment of TMPs via air sparging and soil vapor extraction under Alternative 3 to address future vapor intrusion risks. EPA's preferred alternative is Alternative 2, which consists of installing an impermeable cap over the containment area, excavating approximately 1 to 2 feet of wetland and sediment soils with off-site disposal, constructing and/or pavement caps in certain upland soil areas, and requiring vapor intrusion evaluations and/or engineered vapor mitigation systems for future buildings. Slide 11. This slide shows the proposed footprint of the containment area cap and areas of soil contamination requiring cover systems, shown in brown and black. Areas requiring vapor intrusion controls to address future indoor air risks are shown in green. Wetland soils requiring remediation are shown in red, and sediments requiring cleanup are outlined in purple. This alternative is estimated to take approximately 2 years to design and implement, and has an estimated cost of $6.1 million. Under this alternative, the design and footprint of a permanent multi-layer impermeable cap for the containment area would be determined during the remedial design phase, which will also include the closure of the equalization window within the slurry wall by grouting in place. Soil or asphalt cover systems will be placed over areas where soil has concentrations of site contaminants that exceed the proposed cleanup levels. Approximately 4,000 cubic yards of contaminated wetland soil and sediments will be excavated down to 1 foot and disposed off-site at appropriate permitted facilities. EPA prefers this alternative for the following reasons. 1, this alternative eliminates risk to human health from direct exposure to site contaminants and risks to ecological receptors by removing, disposing, and/or covering contaminated soil and sediments. 2, the cap for the containment area will prevent unacceptable ecological risks as well as prevent leaching. 3, contaminants in wetland soil and sediments would be permanently removed, thus eliminating future exposures for ecological receptors by excavating and disposing off-site all wetland soil and sediments with levels of site contaminants above cleanup goals and restoring any disturbed wetland and aquatic habitat. 4, of the 3 alternatives considered, this alternative is the most reliable and the easiest to implement and creates the least risk to the community, workers, the environment, because the least amount of contaminant soil and sediments are handled. This alternative minimizes leaching from the containment area via an impermeable cover coupled with closure of the equalization window notched into the slurry wall. 6, this alternative achieves protectiveness of public health from inhalation risks associated with TMPs at a lower cost than that of the action alternatives considered for PMPs. Vapor intrusion risk in future buildings will be addressed by institutional controls and engineering controls, which will include requirements to conduct evaluations or install engineered systems to prevent unacceptable levels of contaminated vapors from accumulating indoors. 7, institutional controls will address soil remaining with concentrations above those allowed for unrestricted use and unrestricted exposure, prevent disturbance of remedial measures, and restrict use of the Olin property to commercial and industrial. And 8, of the 3 action alternatives considered, this option, which is equally effective as the other 2 options, has the lowest costs. I will now turn the presentation back over to Lynn.
Thank you, Josh. We are now on slide 12, and I would like to explain the opportunities for public input. EPA is seeking input not only on EPA's preferred alternative, but also on all of the alternatives evaluated. The 30-day public comment period began on August 26th and was extended an additional 30 days, now running through Monday, October 26th. Formal comments on the proposed plan or any information in our administrative record can be submitted to EPA at this hearing or in the following ways: by mail sent to Melanie Morash at the address on this slide, by email sent to Melanie's email address on this slide, or by phone. Call the dedicated voicemail box at 617-918-1880 and leave an oral comment. All comments must be postmarked, emailed, or provided orally by October 26th. EPA will consider and provide written responses to all formal comments received during the public comment period and a responsiveness summary attached to the record of decision. This concludes our presentation. We will now begin the formal hearing. This portion of the meeting will be recorded and transcribed for the administrative record. Clive, could you please confirm the meeting is now being transcribed and recorded?
Yes, it's being recorded and transcribed now.
Thank you. For the record, once again, my name is Lynn Jennings, and I am the Chief of the Massachusetts Superfund section in EPA Region 1's office. I will be the hearing officer for tonight's hearing on the proposed remedy for the Olin Chemical Superfund site located in Wilmington, Massachusetts. The purpose of this hearing is to formally accept oral comments on the proposed plan released to the public on October 10th. You may also submit written comments to EPA according to the instructions presented in this proposed plan. A public information meeting on the proposed cleanup plan was held on August 25th. During that meeting, EPA was available to respond to clarifying questions about the site and our plan. EPA will not be responding to comments tonight, but will respond to them in writing after the comment period closes on October 26th. EPA's proposed cleanup plan includes the following actions: construction and operation of new extraction wells and treatment systems to remove dense aqueous phase liquid, or DAPL, and highly contaminated groundwater. Construction and operation of new extraction and treatment systems to capture contaminated groundwater and light non-aqueous phase liquids, or LNAPL, flowing into the surface water. Construct and maintain caps and cover systems on areas of soil contamination that pose an unacceptable ecological risk. Construct and maintain a multi-layer impermeable cap over the feature known as the containment area to prevent leaching and prevent unacceptable ecological risks. Excavate approximately 4,000 cubic yards of contaminated wetland soil and sediment and dispose of it off-site in an appropriate approved facility, and restore the wetlands and floodplains as needed. Prevent future exposure to trimethylpentenes that may pose inhalation risks via vapor intrusion by requiring additional evaluations and/or mitigation measures. Continue studies to close remaining data gaps. Evaluate long-term groundwater cleanup options, leading to the selection of a final cleanup plan for the site. Implement land use restrictions to protect the public health and the remedy. And conduct long-term groundwater and surface water monitoring and periodic reviews to assess the protectiveness of the remedy. The total estimated cost of this proposed remedy is approximately $48 million. Copies of the proposed plan have been made available on EPA's Olin website at www.epa.gov/Superfund/Olin. Now I would like to provide some instructions for the hearing. Anyone listening tonight can provide an oral comment. Please dial the number that is on the top left corner of the screen and provide the operator with the conference code. Once on the phone, please mute your computer to avoid audio disturbances. The order of the question queue is also posted on the screen. We will start with those that pre-registered and then move on to others. When I call your name and it is your turn to speak, the operator will unmute your line. Please state your name and address or your affiliation before giving your comments. After all the comments have been heard, I will close the formal hearing. I will now ask the operator to unmute the line of the first commenter, which will be Jeff Hull.
Your line is open now, Jeff.
Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Hull, the Wilmington Town Manager. 121 Glen Road is the town hall address. And I offer the following comments for the record. There is no local issue that more fully unifies residents in Wilmington than cleaning up the Olin Superfund site. The discovery of contaminants on the Olin Corporation property predates my 33-year tenure with the town, and we are now only reaching a point when remedial action is within sight. For a community to be told that contamination within its borders is so pervasive and so severe as to merit designation as a Superfund site is a bit like the person who is diagnosed with cancer. The town wholeheartedly endorsed the Environmental Protection Agency taking charge of this site in 2006 to marshal its resources and expertise. However, as with cancer, there is much uncertainty and treatment offers no guarantees. The deep-seated hope and expectation is that the course of treatment/remediation prescribed by the experts will restore this ecosystem in South Wilmington to good health. The 5 municipal wells that were shut down due to the detection of NDMA supplied over half of the water provided to residents and businesses. Each and every one of us who turns on the tap expects the water from the tap is safe for drinking, bathing, cooking, and irrigation, and it should be. The premise that businesses or anyone could dispose of chemicals in unlined lagoons or simply bury barrels without consequence to their neighbors or future generations seems unfathomable today. But this is where we are in Wilmington, Massachusetts in 2020. It has been stated many times previously, and it bears repeating, that remediation plans must be designed and executed with the restoration of the town's drinking water in mind, whether that effort takes 25 years or 125 years. The town's drinking water is a natural resource that future generations should have the right to safely enjoy. In the absence of EPA requiring a rigorous and thorough restoration to enable reuse of the aquifer, polluters may conclude that if the contamination is severe enough or complex enough, they will not be held responsible for full cleanup. The Olin Superfund site is incredibly complex due to the constituents of concern on-site and off-site, along with migration of constituents in groundwater and in bedrock fissures, and also being along the divide of the Maple, Meadow, and Aberjona aquifers. Regardless of the scale and complexity of the contamination, EPA must hold the potentially responsible parties accountable to the highest standard of cleanup. Over the past 20 years, the Olin site has been targeted for commercial redevelopment. There is recognition that one of EPA's objectives is to restore property for reuse. However, redevelopment efforts cannot be timed in such a way as to limit, curtail, or infringe upon the ability of the potentially responsible parties' obligations and ability to conduct a complete and comprehensive cleanup and restoration as prescribed by EPA. Any redevelopment must wait or work around the site conditions and remedial measures that are being established and are being implemented, and not vice versa. The town recognizes that in spite of the extensive study of this area, data gaps remain, and that those gaps must be addressed by gathering additional information that creates a clearer and more complete picture. EPA's decision to propose an interim action for removal of dense aqueous phase liquids, or DAPL, and extraction of groundwater hot spots at the level of 5,000 nanograms per liter, while at a higher concentration threshold than the town would like to see, is a start at removing contaminants. The town believes that EPA should lower this concentration threshold as soon as practicable to ensure that the lower concentration of contaminants are removed as quickly as technically possible. Concerning the remedial approaches to extract and treat groundwater, the discharge of treated groundwater should be completed in such a way to the greatest extent possible to minimize the interbasin transfer of groundwater between the two impacted watersheds. The proposed approach to address the containment area calls for placement of a permanent cap over the containment area with no excavation of upland soils. The town strongly believes that a permanent cap is critical for keeping precipitation and runoff from penetrating into the containment area. This cap is particularly critical given serious concerns about the structural integrity of the slurry walls and ability of the seams between the bedrock and slurry walls to contain the contaminants. The town shares EPA's concern that significant contamination likely remains undetected inside the containment cell. Additionally, the fact that the contaminant area was constructed nearly 20 years ago raises serious concerns about its viability to continue to serve its intended purpose over the long term. These concerns reinforce the imperative that at a minimum a permanent cap be placed over the containment area. The town also has concerns about the imposition of restrictions on use of wells in the area. While the intended purpose certainly has merit, the town would like to receive examples of regulations or bylaws that EPA has developed in conjunction with other communities with Superfund sites that have been adopted by those communities and that are achieving their intended purpose. I would like to note that the town's environmental consultant, GeoInsight, is finalizing its technical comments, which will be submitted to EPA prior to the October 26, 2020 deadline. I wish to thank the team at EPA for your focused efforts to develop a game plan for what, by all accounts, is a tremendously challenging site. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Next up will be Jo Marie O'Mahony.
Jo Marie, your line is now open.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jo Marie O'Mahony. I'm one of the members of the Town of Wilmington's Board of Selectmen. I just wanted to join in my comment to support what Town Manager Hull just said, to support what I believe Chairman Eaton is going to say shortly, to join in what Representative Robertson and Senator Tarr will be submitting in writing, as well as our consultants, GeoInsights, will be writing. I would want to note, I am not a scientist. I don't understand the nuances of some of what has been presented still, even though I've read the documentation. And I think that makes me kind of a member of the community here, in that we know there's a problem. We know it's a big problem. We know it's a problem that has gone on for over 40 years. And we're happy to see, happy is probably not the right word, to see that there are now solutions being discussed. But unfortunately, I think a lot of people's sentiment at this point is too little too late. So it is difficult for me to listen to the alternatives tonight being discussed with dollar signs on them, when the 4% increase in mitigating something may seem minimal for a $4 million increase, for example, in one of the alternatives. But 4% improvement is better than zero improvement, which is what the town has been dealing with, if not a negative impact as things progress and the plume grows. So I would just ask the EPA, you submitted in your proposed plan the 9 criteria of choosing the plan, and I would ask for you to really focus on the community acceptance of the plan through our consultants and through our representation, that you look at the long-term effectiveness, that you look at the short-term effectiveness, and you realize that we're not as concerned with the dollar figure as we are with the human cost. And we want this started now, and we would like this to be done in a thoughtful way that finally addresses the issues that this town has been discussing for so long. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Gary Mercer.
Gary Mercer, your line is open now.
Okay, thank you. My name is Gary Mercer. I work on the Citizen Committee for the Wilmington Environmental Restoration, and we've been working with EPA for about 12 years or more, and many of us much longer than that with the DEP stuff. My comments on this are more of a technical nature, since we've been reviewing these documents and working with EPA for a long time. I'm going to start out with groundwater hot spots. I think EPA can do more. Obviously, taking it down to 5,000 is good, but the standard out there we're looking for NDMA is around 10. So 5,000 to 10 is still a long ways. I think it's an easy case to make to go down to 1,100, the other alternative. The cost is a bit more, but it's only about 15% more. It's about $5 million. And we take out a lot more mass, and I think that's a very good thing to do. The additional wells you need to put in from them are not difficult sites to do. So I'm having difficulty to see why EPA picked the 5,000 one other than the efficiency of mass removal. Yes, you get a little less mass at 1,100, but for a community that's waiting to get the number down to 10 in this watershed, the aquifer, I think 1,100 is a good step in the right direction there. I see a reason, hard to say why we wouldn't go to 1,100 for that one. One of my other areas of concern is the containment area. And this has been a long discussion we've had with the agencies and everyone on this one. The containment area is sort of a containment area. It's not really keyed into bedrock, so it really doesn't contain any of the groundwater. It can seep under it and will seep out of it, and it will continue to do that even after it's capped and the window goes out. So I'm a little concerned that we're going to be calling it a containment area, but it's not really a containment area. And I think that's sort of wrong in some ways. I think there's two options here. One is actually, as one of your alternatives said, is to clean up the containment area, pull the soils out that are above the levels, contaminant levels. You looked at, put these alternatives together before the containment area investigations were done by Olin. So I think if you go back and look at this actual soil data, you can come up with a better estimate of the amount of soils that would have to be removed out of the containment area and not cap it at all, because I think they're comparable to what we find on the outside. On the other hand, if you do want to cap it, I am wondering why the upland soils and the other soils like TMP is not put in the containment area. That's fairly standard on Superfund sites. I have a containment area. I take all the bad stuff off the site. I put it in the containment area and I cap it. So I would see either that it's not a containment area and we clean it up and not cap it, or if we are going to cap it, we take all of the soils off outside that you're just going to pave over basically and put in that containment area. One of my concerns on the upland soil ones and the TMP is the long history of this site, in industrial use in many cases, having to trust them to pave it over and not disturb an area, whether it's 25 years from now or 100 years from now. I think it's much better for the community if that contaminated soil, the upland soils, much like the sediment in the wetland soils, is moved off-site or put in a secure area. I just don't like the idea that somebody 40 years from now could decide to move around something and dig a new foundation, and heaven below, they forgot all about that. So I think it's another level of protection, either all the upland soils off the site or in the containment area overall. And my last major comments, and I will put all these in writing as usual with these stuff, is the surface water question. And I've commented before to you while you were doing through this, EPA, is the number you selected, the PRG for ammonia is actually too high. The number should be lower, I'm pretty certain. And I think we've talked a little bit about that already. And I also not certain if the wells you've put in are going to be adequate to achieve that PRG in the stream for ammonia or chrome. There's no analysis to support to say these wells would work. There's some on paper, but there's no analysis to say I can remove enough groundwater and the receiving water will meet the ammonia standard. So there's a little more information needed there in order to determine whether the ammonia would be met overall for that one. I do think some of the things, not all negative comments, obviously the DAPL removal is great, and finally you can start moving on that, and that will remove a lot of stuff. And the LNAPL program, finally trying to address that, and in that operation sometime in the foreseeable future to get all that old LNAPL out of that site overall. So I realize I threw a lot of technical stuff at you. All this stuff will be contained in our written comments for the October deadline. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Gary, and also I didn't thank Joe Marie. My screen went blank, so I apologize for that. Next up is Matt Crescenzo.
Matt Crescenzo, your line is now open.
Hi, my name is Matt Crescenzo. I'm from Congressman Moulton's office. I just wanted to say that I'm here to represent the Congressman tonight, and our office continues to remain available to assist both the town and the residents of Wilmington in any way we can during this process. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Next up will be Jonathan Eaton.
Jonathan, your line is now open.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Eaton. I live at 18 Lawrence Street in Wilmington, and I'm also a member of the Wilmington Board of Selectmen. The additional components under the Action Alternatives component includes a number of institutional controls that the town would be responsible for, including the prohibiting of use of groundwater in the groundwater study area for potable or irrigation purposes. The EPA is encouraging accomplishing this and other restrictions through the use of town ordinances, building permit requirements, and other administrative controls. It would provide a significant benefit to the town in accomplishing these goals if they were described with more specificity, and if you could reference other communities that have had to implement similar actions so that we could expedite these necessary changes to help facilitate the cleanup. Remediating the aquifer to a drinkable standard should not be limited to on-site, but should expand to the extent of the plume. While the current interim plan calls for cleanup of areas to a 5,000 nanograms per liter of NDMA, it is imperative that all locations, both on-site and off-site, are returned to that drinkable standard. If the town is expected to implement restrictions on private property to prevent homeowners from using wells to access groundwater that was polluted by the potentially responsible parties, it should be with the expectation that this resource is returned to a drinkable standard. The additional components under the action alternatives component also includes reference to the periodic 5-year reviews to assess the remedy protectiveness. The contemplated duration of this cleanup requires this periodic review to determine that the final plan is as effective as anticipated, and that any changes later deemed necessary to accomplish the stated goals of the cleanup plan be made. I would encourage that those periodic reviews be diligent in analyzing the effectiveness of the plans as implemented, and proactive in adjusting mechanisms to improve the effectiveness and duration of the cleanup as those opportunities may present themselves. And finally, a basic tenet of our civil law is that the remedy should cure the injury caused. I would implore that the EPA use all administrative avenues available to them in facilitating a cleanup that returns the quality of the water affected by this containment to that original drinkable standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next up is Martha Stevenson.
Martha Stevenson, your line is now open.
Thank you. My name is Martha Stevenson. I'm a member of the Wilmington Environmental Restoration Committee, as mentioned by Gary a couple minutes ago. We want first and foremost to thank the EPA for extending the comment period. This plan is a critical step forward in getting a cleanup started after so many years of waiting. I'd also like to thank our town manager, Jeff Hull. He did a very eloquent job of capturing many of the same concerns we, as also representatives of members of the community, share. I'd like to remind everyone, first and foremost, the reason this site was brought into the Superfund program is because of contaminated groundwater. We're a little disappointed that EPA's focus, as has been Olin's throughout this process, has been on Olin's property specifically at 51 Eames Street. The sediments, the soils, the streams. The real problem here is groundwater contamination, and we should never forget that. That being said, we were pleased that EPA finally took action and promoted a plan because Olin was never going to really get there. We strongly encourage our fellow residents to comment, and again, because EPA has extended the comment period, we have another month for you to weigh in and give your opinion. At the same time, we're very disappointed, and I think we've expressed this to EPA in meetings already, that the format of this meeting is just so unfriendly to the many, many residents and citizens in Wilmington and North Woburn who have participated in these public meetings in the past. So it's a real disservice to have a virtual meeting where we've had as many as 400 people in person to express their concerns and to listen and to really understand what's going on at the that being said, there are a number of proposed actions that EPA is proposing that work agrees with, and several that I think Gary enumerated we don't think go quite far enough. The contaminated soils on the property should not just be covered over. They should be cleaned up. Olin has had ample opportunity and time to get serious about removing contaminated groundwater. They have known about NDMA being present on their site since at least 1990. And they knew even by early 2000s, 2002, that NDMA had migrated over to our municipal drinking water wells. They should get zero consideration, and we don't care what it costs them, for now arguing it will be impossible to remove NDMA from our water supply. Because they let it languish for so many years, it's now migrated far and wide. They're responsible for not taking urgent action 20 or even 30 years ago. EPA must hold Olin accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Next up will be Suzanne Sullivan.
Suzanne, your line is now open.
Thank you, Suzanne Sullivan, 60 Lawrence Street. I just want to first thank everybody for commenting already, and the people that are listening, and we really, really appreciate it. I do want to say that I concur with Martha about my disappointment, but with this proceeding, but I also have some written comments, so I guess I'll read those. I usually don't write comments down, but it's just, I figured it's not a very comfortable situation talking on the phone with this stuff, so I wrote it down. Work will be issuing more official comments on the technical merits of the proposed remediation plan, so tonight is more about establishing a record and to speak from a community perspective rather than a technical one. Although we do fully support the EPA's effort to move the remediation forward, the devil is in the details. Work could not be more disappointed in the outcome of the process we are participating in today. Work has reached out to the community to help the EPA with requirements under Superfund and to also meet our requirements under the Technical Assistance Grant. We do recognize the current situation with the pandemic and also understand the limitations. Unfortunately, lives lost to the pandemic is not the only casualty of COVID-19. Democracy has also suffered a major blow, and these remote meetings surely highlight such. Work will continue to engage the community in hopes more people will continue to comment and pay attention via emails and letters and hopefully by phone. But a lot of people that are older and do not and cannot participate in this manner that have participated in the past could not be heard. Secondly, as pleased as we are that there is finally a cleanup plan on the horizon after over 20 years of promises, assurances, and rhetoric from Olin and the agencies that oversee Olin, we are also disappointed to some regard. Well, we are all, hold on, because as always, things seem to always go in the favor of Olin and not the community. Part of this process is to gather community support, but how does one gather support during a pandemic? Please also be reminded community is not just the town government, the boards, the employees, it's the whole community. As kind and respectful as EPA has been to work, we as a group that represents the residents of the community through a citizen advocacy avenue feel the need to make part of the record our feelings about the process that has brought us to where we are today and the injustices that have been committed against our residents. We realize that in making these comments part of the record that the EPA can or cannot take them into consideration when deciding on the final remedial options. But maybe, just maybe, it will pull on the heartstrings of one or two of the EPA, it will pull on the heartstring or two of the EPA and maybe become more of an advocate for the people and not for Olin. Maybe someone somewhere will read this in the archives and prevent what happened to Wilmington from happening to someone else. Or maybe Olin will actually make amends and do the right thing for the community it has hurt so much. I want to thank everybody for their comments. Once again, please be reminded of the history that brought Olin into the Superfund program. For years, Olin came to the Board of Selectmen meetings alongside with DEP showing charts tracking the contamination from what they called a stable plume of contamination, the so-called DAPL. They were tracking this contamination into the Wilmington water supply. Olin and DEP assured the town that the contamination was okay, even though it was coming into our wells. Unfortunately, that contamination was naturally attenuating in the bodies of the Wilmington residents. And just for the record, Olin's preferred remediation of the site in 2000, which DEP gave the okay, was natural attenuation at that time. They continually told our town that the water was safe to drink, that it met all standards. Our Board of Selectmen thanked them, thanked DEP, and thanked DEP for watching out for us. But the citizens were not convinced. We reviewed files, we looked up their chemicals, we found out what they were not testing for, and we found out they were not testing for everything. Their statements were only half true. Yes, the water did meet the standards, but it was not safe. Sort of like the mentality of, if you do less COVID-19 testing, then you have less COVID-19 to report. Good for shareholders and PR, bad for the people and the environment. When Olin was required to test for NDMA because the citizens in town pushed the DEP to require it, indeed it was there. A carcinogen that has no standards but is deadly. No matter what the childhood cancer study says, we all know in our hearts what the truth is. That was over 20 years ago, and here we are today. Olin is poised to sell that property, and there is a legitimate concern that it will cause more insult to injury. That is just plain wrong to do that to a community that has already been hurt. For EPA to claim that they chose a scenario of less truck traffic to minimize the impact to the area, the containment area, and the area, well, they claim to close, they chose a scenario of less truck traffic to minimize impact to the area where there is a proposal on the table to have those impacts daily, 7 days a week, 24/7 is so disingenuous. The impact that I'm talking about is the removal of the soils from the containment area would have created 400 truck trips today, and that scenario was not chosen because it would impact the area. And we find that pretty disingenuous. Olin is a corporation that has its own army of people to protect it. The residents of Wilmington need to depend on the government to protect us. A corporation can't get sick, can't get cancer, can't have children, can't drink the water they contaminated. And it certainly won't be hurt by the new development that is proposed in their property. But the people of Wilmington have been hurt and will continue to be hurt if our advocates do not do the right thing for us. Therefore, we ask the EPA to take the hardest line on Olin and consider the most protective measures like going to the 1,100 NGLs hot spots instead of the 5,000. Work also realizes this plan may be the only one we get in our lifetime. We are realists, we get it, we get the process. 8 years is a long time to wait for results. Why not go for the 1,100 NGLs? We ask that the data gaps be closed before OU1 and OU2 be finalized. We want the site fully characterized and think after 25 years that is not an unreasonable request. The fact that data gaps have not been closed is a travesty and an insult to the community. We strongly urge and ask that these gaps be filled before any development of the property and any closeout of OU1 and OU2. Olin has allowed the unmitigated groundwater contamination to spread and travel to Lord knows where, and the EPA has been unable to make them budge until now. Great plan by Olin, right? Let the contamination spread and then claim it has spread. It is unfeasible to clean up. Work is fully aware that this process, and we now are in the step to technical and feasibility waivers. For this reason, work wants the OU3 and the groundwater piece done in tandem, not separately from OU1 and OU2. We care most about the contaminated groundwater. Imagine where we would be today if the DEP had made Olin do a pump and treat in the containment area 20 years ago when the citizens asked for it back then. We don't want to hear that it's too expensive. They should have done it years ago, and they didn't, 20 years ago. We want a real cleanup, not a cover up the contaminated materials, including the so-called containment area that really is not containing according to the docs. Work wants the zone 2 of the wells defined. We asked continually years ago to have this done to no avail. Since the containment area has been installed, there has been no groundwater study done in the area. The future use of the property and the remedial outcomes are supposed to be predicated on where the zone 2 is. How can this happen when the zone 2 is suspect, since it was done in the 70s before the containment area and the where was put in? We want the town, the DEP, and the EPA to do their jobs and adequately define the zone 2 of the Maple Meadowbrook wells. Work wants problems addressed now. We don't want to have them addressed later. We have waited for long enough. Stormwater and discharges and treated water is concerned, and we expect that the wetlands will be restored to natural wetlands. Once again, work will submit more technical comments. These are meant as more community comments. The community does not care so much about the technical issues. They care more about the EPA doing the right thing on their behalf and on behalf of the people. The community has been hurt and needs to heal. A strong cleanup plan is a step in the right direction. The question is this the best, most responsible plan, or can EPA make it better? Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Next up will be Liz Harriman.
Ms. Harriman, your line is now open.
Thank you. Yes, this is Liz Harriman, also with the community group work. All the comments before me have been spot on, and so I won't repeat all of those. Certainly want to echo them, and particularly the goal that EPA has been reassuring us of since the beginning, that the goal is to restore the aquifer to drinking water standards. We appreciate that EPA is focusing on removing source material and has really tried to push that forward, even in light of Olin's reticence to move forward. But nevertheless, every single day, more contamination seeps into the fractured bedrock. We support the most aggressive approach possible and schedule to removing that source material. EPA says that many decisions about the specific extraction wells and coverage will be determined during the design phase for source removal, and it's just not satisfactory to approve an interim action without having a better idea of the actual extent of contamination and the design and how much material and at what rate the source material is going to be removed. So we really want to see that design and the installation of those extraction wells as soon as physically possible. Again, work will be submitting comments, and we certainly appreciate that EPA is trying to move this along at a good pace. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Next up will be Ethan Sawyer.
Ethan Sawyer, your line is now open.
Hi, my name is Ethan Sawyer. I live at 58 Lawrence Street. I'm primarily concerned with what the long-term future of the community will be. I know that the national priorities list for the Superfund sites focuses on reuse of the Superfund sites. I know that Olin Chemical is an international company that heavily relies upon railway as a primary method to transport finished products to customers and to transport raw materials to the manufacturing facilities used by each of Olin's businesses. Olin Chemical intended to sell or lease the Superfund site to a company that would use the property as a waste transfer station. Olin still has an agreement in place that would allow New England Transrail to build and operate a truck-to-rail transfer station, which is expected to transport and store various chemicals, construction and demolition debris, municipal solid waste, and contaminated soil. New England Transrail was and still uses the doing business as name of Wilmington and Woburn Terminal Railway Construction, Acquisition, and Operation Exemption in Wilmington and Woburn, Massachusetts. New England Transrail has put those efforts on pause while they now operate as a new company named Wilmington Woburn Intermodal LLC with a stated purpose of purchasing and developing the property at 51 Eames Street. The definition of the word intermodal is a method of conveying goods involving two or more different modes of transportation. We know they're not using boats over there, and we know they're not using airplanes over there. So kind of leaves us with trucks and railway. The town took a strong position against New England Transrail, but seems more accepting of the new alternative solution. But I still have a lot of concerns that eventually the Olin site will be reused for transmodal or truck-to-trail transportation of goods and housing of those goods. And so the question that I have is really,
I guess in part to Olin, you know, if they intend to use railway at 51 Eames Street to transport or warehouse chlorine or other chemicals that they are in the business of selling and transporting. And then to the state, I know that, you know, we're down to sort of the last two considerations, the 9 of the criteria for getting this plan approved, which is community support and state support. And, you know, so I have concerns that there is only one deed restriction on the property, and it has to do with not using the contaminated groundwater. But outside of that, I feel like we're left wide open to all the same concerns that, all the same risks that we were as a community 15 years ago when New England Transrail first came around. And so that, I guess that's really my concern, knowing that the reuse is the focus and that we seemingly haven't done a lot to protect ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan Sawyer. Next up will be Stephanie Bama.
Stephanie Bama, your line is now open.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Stephanie Bama. Address is 14 Kelly Road in Wilmington. The comments I would like to submit are nothing that hasn't already been said, but I would like to lend my voice to the following 4 points. First, a reiteration of exasperation at the long, drawn-out timeline that we're seeing, but admitted slight relief at the movement that is seemingly beginning. Second, agreement with the reiteration that the goal should be restoration of the drinking water quality of the aquifer. Third, encouragement that the knowledge gaps be filled before any final remediation decisions are made with incomplete data, because that would be a mistake. And fourth, I want to encourage the EPA to hold Olin's feet to the fire. They're a prime example of negligence and corporate abuse, and their preferences should be of no value whatsoever in these decisions. I hope that they're responsible for as much of the bill as possible to diminish that which will be footed by the taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. So that, at this point, concludes the list of people that both registered or asked to participate during the meeting. We welcome anybody else that is still on the line that would like to offer an oral comment. You may do so as well. You can send us a message in the text support box or simply dial the telephone number that is on the welcome screen, 833-681-4865, and provide the operator with a conference code of 8377541. We are going to keep the line open. We are planning to stay here till 9 o'clock in case there are other folks that dial in a little bit late and want to offer a verbal comment. We appreciate the comments and feedback we've received thus far, and as I said earlier, we will be providing responses to those as part of our record of decision and our written responsiveness summary.